All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, my embraced family, and welcome back to our weekly Wednesday discussion where we are going over the autobiography of Malcolm X. So this week we're going over chapter 2, which will be led by our Sister Rashida Floyd. With that, Sister Rashida, we'll go ahead and send it off to you. She'll give us a 15, 20 to 25 minutes opening of a general overview of the chapter. Then from there, as per usual, we'll end the live stream and then open the floor for a discussion, inshallah ta'ala. So with that, Sister Rashida, you go ahead. You have the floor, inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair for listening. Assalam Alaykum, embrace family. And Jazakallah khair for joining us for chapter 2 of the autobiography of Malcolm X. Last time we discussed how Malcolm's family lost their father and essentially their mother too. Their father was believed to have been murdered, and the mother was institutionalized due to mental health issues. And the children were separated and placed into foster homes, and there were some of them who were placed together, though. In tonight's chapter, called Mascot, we learn about Malcolm's transition to another foster home, his education, and eventually his move to Boston. So let's start with the title of the chapter, Mascot. And when we think about this word, I know I immediately think about sports, right? And, you know, the person who's dressed up in a costume, usually an animal costume. And there are basically two instances where Malcolm mentions that he felt like a mascot. But before we get there, though, speaking of sports, Malcolm shares in a very comical way his very short fighting career at around age 13. It was after the Joe Louis fight, where he beat a white opponent to become heavyweight champion of the world. And all of the little boys wanted to be like Joe Louis. And Malcolm's brother was a pretty good boxer, so Malcolm thought he could do it too. But he got beaten, not once, but twice, by the same white boy, and was teased so badly that he said he could barely show his face around town. So I think, you know, the fact that he shared this shows his sense of humor and how secure he was with himself, because I know, you know, at least for myself, I don't know if I would have shared such a humiliating story like that one. I don't know if many of us would have. So subhanAllah. So the first time that Malcolm felt like a mascot, he continued to get into trouble, including at school, but thought he'd just be able to run the streets, you know, with more free time after he got expelled. So he was shocked when he was taken away to be put into a reform school. But before that, the intermediate step was for him to go to a detention home to, you know, await his hearings, etc. And so this transitional home, which was pretty much a foster home, was in a white part of town. And the new foster family was the Swirlins family, and they liked Malcolm right away. And he also considered them good people, and he liked them too. Now, Malcolm continued to do the same chores he would do at his prior foster home, and, you know, his work ethic and his personality endeared him to his new foster parents. However, they would say things around Malcolm that were insulting to the Black race, including using the N-word very often, as if Malcolm wasn't even there. And he said that made him feel like a pet. And they liked him so much, they decided to keep him and send him to a local school instead of the reform school. So he begins to attend this predominantly white school, and he references there was only one other Black family that had children in the school besides himself. And of course, at the school too, they also used derogatory names to address him, and this included the teachers, one teacher even making Black jokes often. But since he was a novelty, one of the only Black kids in the school, they were okay with him being around. And this was the other way he felt like a mascot. So now when we talk about the things that made Malcolm who he became, this experience influenced how he felt white people viewed Blacks and themselves. He said that whites felt a sense of superiority that prevented them from seeing Blacks as their equal. He said that therefore later he tried to impress this upon his fellow Blacks, that they need not try to integrate because it wouldn't work, because he knew from experience, right? He had tried hard enough, he said. So his educational experiences or his educational experience was pivotal in two respects, I believe, when it comes to who he became. And the first is that he did exceptionally well academically. He knew, without a doubt, that he was as smart as the white kids. And I think this gave him the confidence to know that in this case, which is a very important one, intellect, which is something that's always kind of, touted when speaking about superiority, that he knew in this case he was not inferior. And I think this helped to fuel him later in life when confronting racism. And the second thing that happened was that a teacher decided to share with him the ceiling of his capabilities regarding a profession. While the teacher encouraged all of the white kids, to become whatever they wanted to be, he discouraged Malcolm, who said he wanted to be a lawyer, and suggested he be realistic and do something with his hands instead, like carpentry. And so Malcolm, knowing that he was as smart or smarter than the other kids, took great offense to this notion. With everything he had endured up to this point, this was kind of surprising to hear him say that this was, quote, the first major turning point in my life. Imagine everything he had been through with his mom, his dad, the separation of his family. He called this the first major turning point in his life, subhanAllah. He said, quote, "It was then that I began to change. Inside, I drew away from white people." And I think this experience also helped to fuel Malcolm, not to settle and to strive to do his best. And in the concluding paragraph of the chapter, he mentions, "Whatever I have done since then, I have driven myself to become a success at it." And he even mentions that very same teacher, in the very next sentence. And this teacher wasn't the one who used to make the black jokes. This was actually the one that he kind of liked. Now, as for his move and how he ended up in Boston, his half-sister Ella, who was an adult and doing well, began writing her family in Michigan. And I had to keep reminding myself that Malcolm wasn't living in the South because of how they were treating him, right? Any further north, he would have been in Canada. So Malcolm began to write her also, and she decided to come for a visit. Now, he said that she was the first, quote, proud black woman he had ever seen, and he admired her a lot. And she fawned all over him too, when she visited, and his academic achievements, et cetera. And while she did visit all of her siblings, Malcolm was the one who would visit her in Boston that summer at her invitation. So he goes to visit her, and, in what could be considered an affluent, black part of town. And he was in awe, first at the sheer number of black people, and then also at the status of the black people he met and just the conversations that he was able to, engage in. And he begins to get, to gain some of that pride that he saw in his sister. And he began to have self-respect. So when he goes back home, he is not the same. He's not the same anymore. The derogatory names and the things, said about black people no longer just rolls off his back. He's angered by it. And his foster parents, not understanding, what had changed in Malcolm, decided to go ahead and send him to live with the black family in town. They knew that he wasn't happy anymore. He was no longer their mascot. So, however, though, he did feel, badly for his foster mother, because he felt she did care for him, and, he cared about her as well. And he wrote to his sister Ella. He did end up staying with the black family for about 2 months, but he had written to his sister Ella asking if he could come and live with her. And she agreed and was able to get custody of him and move him to Boston. Now, the first thing I'll say is I wondered if, this was her goal, and it made me think, first of all, if it was, that she had to really play it cool when she visited him and basically saw that her brother was a pet, and that while doing well in school and everything, that he showed no sign of having self-respect. And I doubt very seriously if it could have been different because of how she carried herself, but I wondered if their language changed at all while she was visiting. Allahu A'lam. But it did make me want to learn more about her. So I did look her up. And in one interview when she was a little bit older, she mentions that about 6 months before her father was killed, that he told her that if anything ever happened to him, that he wanted her to take care of Malcolm. And she mentioned in another interview when she was a little bit younger, that the seventh child, which Malcolm was considered special by her ancestral tribe. So she thought that was also a reason why he was favored. So it turns out, and I can't recall if this is in, later chapters of the book because it's been a long time since I've read it. So spoiler alert if so, sorry. But Ella Little Collins, according to Wikipedia, becomes Muslim. And first under the Nation of Islam, and then in 1959, she embraced Sunni Islam. She is also the one who paid for Malcolm's trip to Hajj. So I thought that was pretty interesting about her. She passed away in 1996. May Allah have mercy on her. And so that's pretty much it. Next week, I believe it's going to be Brother Kenneth with the chapter Homeboy. And so we can, go ahead and stop the live recording and start our conversation, inshallah.